Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of Book of Mormon Found. This is going to be a great one. So in this episode today, we're going through all of the Joseph Smith quotes to kind of learn more about Joseph Smith's model for the Book of Mormon. Right? And this is kind of going to be a launch pad that we'll go off of to highlight the continental model, right? So anyway, this is really great. This is one of my favorite kind of topics to hit because there are so few people who really have delved into all of the quotes of Joseph Smith. And it's something I had wondered about a long time. Like, honestly, it's kind of crazy because I completely developed my model before I ever saw even 3/4 of these quotes. And it was just like this pleasant surprise. It's like, holy cow, like mine is the only model out there. Like, I'm serious, the only model out there that believes all the quotes by Joseph Smith, right? I mean, we've got like this big split in the church where we've got all of these kind of Mesoamerican Mayanland models for the Grijalva and New Samacinta model, and they really like the Joseph Smith quotes that back up their model, right? There's a number of them, mostly from the Times and Seasons, and so they kind of like hold those up, and then they dismiss, like some of them might believe, you know, some of the Southern quotes that talk about their landing, and then they kind of find ways to dismiss the quotes that talk about the Heartland. And then we have the opposite, like with the Heartland group. We have all these Heartlanders, and they just like hold tight to all the quotes that support their model, and then they completely dismiss all the quotes in the Times and Seasons, right, for the Mesoamerican, say, oh, that was Wilford Woodruff, and that, you know, Joseph Smith didn't know about it. And then, of course, both of them completely just ignore the quotes that talk about the Southwest. Anyway, these are things that I'm sure that you probably have never even heard of yourself. So anyway, hold on tight while we go through this episode, and we're going to go through all of the quotes of Joseph Smith and really try and get a feel for what he believed as far as the Book of Mormon. As far as the documentary evidence we have of quotes, you know, whether they're firsthand or secondhand or thirdhand, and we will just go through that all. So if you haven't hopped on my website, I encourage you to do so, because we're basically just going to be following along with my article on this episode, because I have cataloged every single, you know, firsthand quote or even secondhand quotes that support firsthand quotes, you know, as long as there's a firsthand quote that it's supporting. I catalog them all. Not only that, do I quote them directly out, I also have references so that you can click on them and see the first-hand references, which when I was kind of doing the research and looking at other people's stuff, that's what I really wanted. I'm like, well, I'm not going to believe anybody's thing. I really want to delve into this, and I want to see the reference myself. Like if this is in Times and Seasons or Joseph Smith papers, I wanted to be able to click on it, read it myself, so I can see what parts above and below the quote that they might have chopped out, and I did that, right? So yeah, hold on to your hat, and I hope you'll share this with other people too, because this is an awesome topic, a big topic that is so poorly understood, like I said, because there are so many people who kind of believe in their pocket models, who kind of hold on to the quotes that fit their model and discount all the others. If there are any quotes that I've missed, which I don't believe there are, you know, I've really scoured the internet for years and years to pull together all these quotes. If there are any quotes, right, first-hand quotes from Joseph Smith, or possibly purporting to be from Joseph Smith, or a second-hand or third-hand reference that supports one of those first-hand quotes, right? Drop it in the comments, like share it, because I would love it if there are other quotes out there that I've somehow missed. I don't think there are, but man, that would be pleasant. I'd be pleasantly surprised. And even if they somehow were to contradict my model, I don't know how that would be possible. If you find a quote where he says it's happening in Malaysia or something like that, yeah, drop it in the comments and let's hear it, and maybe I can do an addendum to this video and make sure I include that. I'll definitely add it onto my article. Okay, so let's just jump right in, and we're gonna read these. I want to just hit home for those who are new to this channel, haven't checked out my other videos, right? The Book of Mormon Found series is talking about my model of the Book of Mormon. You can read about the background of that, how I came to the model. I'm just going to lay it out in so many videos here. I have so much evidence, and like I say, it is a continental model, right? So sometimes I call it the unified continental model, but the continental model basically says that it happened on the entire North American continent, right? So the land of Nephi and Zarahemla happened in Mesoamerica. The land of Cumorah, the land of many waters, actually the land of Mulek, where the Mulekites first landed before they came up to the South Wilderness. The land, anyway, everything in the land northward, Cumorah and many waters, is the Heartland, right? So I kind of pulled together the entire North American continent, and I have a ton of evidence for that. It's really pretty awesome. I hope that you'll check out my other videos to see just the overwhelming amount of evidence that I have for my model, including all of Joseph Smith's quotes, right? Like I said, the only model that really is supported by his quotes. Okay, so if you see the very beginning of my article here, I've kind of tried to make it really simple by outlining on a map the exact kind of areas that the groups of quotes all cover, right? So if you look here, my article is kind of separated into 1 through 5 here, each section, 1 through 5, and each of those sections cover a different area of quotes. So the first section is 2 different quotes, right? We've got 1A, 1B here, and they deal with a South American landing, right? And that's the only quotes we have when it comes to the landing. There are secondhand quotes that aren't substantiating a direct Joseph Smith quote by Orson Pratt that talks about other landings right up in California. But when it comes to people directly attributing a quote saying that I heard Joseph Smith say this, or that we can infer that he heard Joseph Smith say that, there's just 2 of them, right? And they are in South America, one in Concepcion, Chile, and one a little south of the Isthmus of Darien. We'll go through those quotes. The second section, where there are quotes, and these are all from the Times and Season articles, where it says that Joseph Smith was chief editor. We're going to go through evidence, and you can decide for yourself, but there's some pretty overwhelming evidence that makes suggesting that Joseph Smith was completely unaware that those things were being published very unlikely. Like, it's very likely that he absolutely knew that those things were being published, and the idea that he thought that they were completely bogus and yet allowed them to be published, whether he directly wrote them or not, which there's evidence both ways on that, seems silly. He knew they were being published, and he supported them, and he put his signature on them. So, and those quotes have the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla in Mesoamerica, right? In cities that Stephen's Incidents of Travel has covered. So we've got like places like Copan, Janina, Palenque, but also in the Valley of Mexico, right? There's a quote that talks about the city of Tula, which is in the Valley of Mexico, which is part of my model. All right, so the third one, this is the one that neither group, everyone just kind of sweeps this one under the rug. We've got 2 or 3 sources that say specifically that the land of desolation stretched from northern Mexico, like northmost Mexico. We're thinking like Sonora or somewhere like that. But it says the 4 corners specifically, like Arizona, northern Mexico, all the way up into the Great Plains, right? So, and that kind of makes sense. Like, it's the area in North America that's desolate. We'll get into that too. But he has desolation, the place where the Nephites lost their power, is the quote. And we're going to go through these all the way from, like I said, kind of southwest Anasazi regions, all the way up into the plains. And then last of all, we hopefully all are fairly familiar with the huge number of quotes, right, that the Heartlanders, like that's the Heartlanders' really strong point. That's where their model really shines, is there's just a lot of quotes that are very difficult to dismiss without making Joseph Smith into a bit of a fool, that talks about the Nephites, even in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lamanites' descendants, the Nephites themselves, the plains of the Nephites, he puts it, being in the heartland of the United States, the eastern United States, right? And Cumorah being Cumorah, like that being where the battle was fought. Anyway, let's just dive right into all these quotes because there are a lot of them, right? And we're just going to read through my article, and you can read along if you'd like to, or you can just listen to this like it's a podcast, or you can kind of follow along on YouTube here. But let's get going here. Like I say, check out the video, or check out the illustration. I have this on a couple of my different articles. It tells the exact areas, and we're going to talk about how this area of Uto-Aztecan languages actually kind of matches the quotes themselves, and how Uto-Aztecan is actually the only language where there's been peer-reviewed kind of proven study that shows a lot of Hebrew roots in that language, right? There are a lot of commonalities between the Hebrew language and Uto-Aztecan, believe it or not. Cool stuff. Okay, so let's go really quick. So right here in my first part of the article, I go through what I've just kind of explained here, right? The landing, as far as where they traveled after the landing, there in Central America, as far as Joseph Smith quotes that he believed desolation, where the Nephites lost their power, being the Southwest and Great Plains, and then Cumorah, the final battle being in New York, the eastern U.S., being a place where a lot of the Nephites lived, Okay, so, and I talk a little bit about how the church is kind of split between the Heartlanders and the Mesoamericas. It's kind of the big, huge camps. But one thing I want to hit, like in the beginning of this article, the one thing that I really want to emphasize is these 2 quotes where there's some people who just kind of don't believe that Joseph Smith had a very good idea of where the Book of Mormon happened. And I mean, maybe he didn't know, obviously, and maybe I shouldn't say obviously, because I don't even know if there's real evidence to prove that he didn't know exactly where it happened and he just wasn't saying it. But in his quotes, it kind of suggests that he knew a lot, and he probably did understand, at least generally, where it happened. Like, listen to this quote. right? So this is Joseph Smith in the Wentworth in the Wentworth letter. He says, I was informed by the angel, right, concerning the Aboriginal inhabitants of this country, and shown, and we can guess in a vision, who they were and from whence they came. A brief sketch of their origin, progress, civilizations, laws, governments, and their righteousness and iniquity, the blessings of God being finally withdrawn from them as a people, was made known unto me. And I was also told where the deposited some plates on which were engraven the abridgment of the records of the ancient prophets that existed on this continent. The angel appeared to me 3 times in the same night and unfolded the same things. After having received many visits from the angels of God, unfolding the majesty and glory of the events that should transpire in the last days, on the morning of the 22nd of October, 1827, the angel of the Lord delivered the records into my hands, right? So, I mean, check that out. He's saying that 3 times they came and showed him these things, and he really showed him their origin, progress, civilization, right? Laws and governments, like the progress of the people. You could suggest this, like, well, maybe that's not where they live. Maybe it's other things. I don't know, but you can be the judge after we go through all of these. Right? Check out this other one by Lucy Mack Smith. It says, during our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life among them. Okay, let me just explain. So in my experiences where I've had these kind of visionary experiences in the morning, right, in that state between sleep and wakefulness, and I have these really interesting visionary experiences that some might think they're like real and some might think they're just in my mind, they're a dream. I don't know, you can decide my own ideas, but I'll tell you what's specific is when I've had these experiences where I feel like I'm being taught by a being. I've talked to a lot of people who've had this same type of thing. It's like a mind meld, it's like a psychic connection between your mind and the other person. There's no like moving lips when you're talking back and forth with each other, and you don't just get words, you get like this download and a picture of what they're thinking while they're speaking as well. And if you've had that experience, maybe leave a thing in the comments. I've talked to a lot of people who have. Maybe when this channel gains some traction, we can get some more people to share their experiences on that. But this is what I picture when Joseph Smith is saying this, like that he had these experiences, and it wasn't just words that these angels were telling him. He was getting a real picture of everything about these ancient people, right? Like in like a digital download almost. That's what I believe anyway. And you can decide for yourself after reading through all the quotes. Okay, so let's just go through these quotes really quick. So the first one, like we said, the landing. We say in the article from the Times and Seasons, right? Edited, possibly written by Joseph Smith himself. We'll go over that. He states that Lehites landed a little bit south of the Isthmus of Darien, right? The Isthmus of Darien is just an old name for Panama Canal, right? Sorry, the Isthmus of Panama, below the Panama Canal. So that the Panama Canal goes across. Listen to this quote. It says, when we read the Book of Mormon, that Lehi went down by the Red Sea to the Great Southern Ocean, right? And I have under this links so that you can go and see. Like it shows the Great Southern Ocean is not really the Atlantic. Like when it says that, so the Southern Ocean can be the Atlantic, but the Great Southern Ocean is specifically the Pacific, right? And let me see, I think that if you click on this, it will actually show you, right? You can go to some articles where it says specifically what it's talking about with the Great Southern Ocean. That's a geography publication right there. There's also like a map that you can go to. It might take a second to load here, but you can see here that the Great Southern Ocean is indeed, like it's not over here, it is over here. The Mar del Sur, right? The Southern Ocean, El Mar Pacifico, El Mar del Sur. That is the Southern Ocean, right? Whereas they were calling it that during the early 18th, 19th century, they were talking about the Atlantic as the Oceana del Trópicos. So it had a different name. And the Mar del India, those had different names. The Southern Ocean was the Mar del Sur, which is Spanish for Ocean of the South. And in the English maps, it's Southern Ocean. Anyway, and I have some links to those. You can go and go through all those if you want. Okay, so let's go a little bit further here. He says that in a second quote, this one is by Franklin D. Richards, after Joseph Smith had died, but like I say, this one actually supports the first-hand one, so I add it. He says they traveled nearly a south-southeast direction until they came to the 19th degree of north latitude. Then nearly east to the Sea of Arabia, then sailed in a southeast direction and landed on the continent of South America in Chile, 30 degrees south latitude. Okay, now this is a funny one. This is really funny because you'll hear, Wayne May, and I kind of think that Rod Meldrum has even said this, but I can't remember exactly. Both are just amazing guys. I love all their research. But you'll hear repeated by people who heard him say it, and I don't know if he said it lately, but he's kind of said, I think that maybe, when he said 30 degrees south latitude, he actually meant 30 degree north latitude, because Florida is actually 30 degree north latitude, and I think that that's what he actually meant. And it's like, no, read the quote again. That does not work. First of all, if somebody lands south of the Isthmus of Darien, like we have Joseph Smith's direct quote, what he would have actually, seen in the Times and Seasons, being editor, unless this happened completely behind his back. He says he has south of the Isthmus of Darien, right? You can't land south of the Isthmus of Darien in the Caribbean. There is no south of the Isthmus of Darien in the Caribbean. To be south of the Isthmus of Darien, you have to be there, not in Colombia, right? Or not in the north coast of Colombia. You have to be on the west coast, right? That's the only way to land south of the Isthmus of Darien. Panama, right? So and then not only that, in this quote in here, he even says specifically, he sailed in a southeast direction and landed on the continent of South America, 30 degrees south latitude. So what? He's like, he said South America, but he actually meant Florida and 30 degrees north latitude. The whole logic, that doesn't work. Okay, the quote is what it is. Don't stretch it. Either you believe the quote or you don't believe the quote. And like I say, if you're a heartlander, you're going to probably dismiss that quote. I don't get why. And a lot of Meso people, they'll dismiss it too. I don't know why either. Like, if you look at my illustration, the reason why that is such a great landing place is because there is a string of islands, right? In fact, I'm going to show you really quick. If you wanted to island hop, right? If you wanted to be able to refuel your water and some supplies and island hop across the Pacific, there is a string of islands that go all the way across the Pacific. And where do they end? Like, after you hit Easter Island, they end right there exactly where he says, right? So look at this. You see this string of island? Every one of these would be like, I think if I did the math, and it was like at a normal speed of what they sailed, and some of the early explorers actually used these islands, it's like a 15-day journey between each of them, right? But look at this, like all the way from where he left, right? You've got almost exactly 15-day stops, except for this one spot at the end where you could go, if you went straight across, you would land right there in Chile where he said, right? 30 degrees south latitude. That's where you'd end up. Or maybe, maybe if it wasn't there, it was up here right south of the Isthmus of Darien. But look at that. It makes sense. It actually, and there, another argument that often is used is the winds are bad, that you can't go across those islands. Once again, that's a horrible argument because the Austronesians did it, right? The people who settled Easter Island and all these, they came from the Austronesian Empire, right? These Austronesians who were from Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, they spread east to Samoa, Tahiti, and then they spread all the way to Easter Island, and they would make these voyages on El Nino years, because during El Nino years, the currents completely reverse. So even though for 4 or 5 years, the currents, indeed do go counter to that direction, so it'd be really hard to sail that direction, you'd have to be tacking like crazy. When in the El Nino years, the currents completely reverse, and so that you actually can head east, right, on these islands, just like you would expect Nephi would, right? You wouldn't be going against contrary currents or winds, and you'd land right there. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a lot of stuff, but like I say, Corral, the city of Corral right there on the coast of Peru, it dates right to the same time as the Great Pyramids. You can read watch my other videos on the ancient empires, and my evidence that I have the Egyptians actually used these same shipping lanes all the way back to the late Bronze Age. Anyway, check out my article where I talk about the Bronze Age Silk Road, where you had a maritime Silk Road going from China to India all the way back to the Bronze Age. It's like 2000 BC. And so anyway, I believe that they were making that voyage all the way back to then. And then I also have a belief that the reason why all those islands weren't inhabited, we don't find archaeological evidence on places like Easter Island or French Polynesia or even Hawaii till like almost 1300 AD. A lot of them are like 1100 AD to 1300 AD. And there's no archaeological evidence before that. It's because I believe at the time of Christ, a comet, actually, most of the distractions they're talking about are a cometary impact in the Pacific, and that the Pacific was decimated, so that most of the settlements were completely decimated by enormous tidal waves at the time of Christ. And then they didn't get repopulated, even though they had been populated before. They didn't get repopulated until about 900 to 1100 AD. But Easter Island and a lot of those megaliths, I believe, are actually from before the time of Christ. Like they're very old, like a lot of people believe. But the carbon dates don't match because those islands were just like swept clean. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the next section I want to hit. So we've hit the landing place. The next thing we're going to hit is the quotes that talk about the land of Nephi, the land of Zarahemla, all being in Mesoamerica. Okay, so the same Times and Seas article that we referenced above, right, that is edited for sure and possibly written by Joseph Smith, the author explicitly states that the Jaredites of the Book of Mormon stretch across the entire North American continent, right? This continent. So all the way from north to south, right? It says when we read the Book of Mormon that Jared and his brothers came onto this continent, North America, from the confusion and scattering of Babel and lived there more than 1,000 years and covered the whole continent from sea to sea with towns and cities, right? That's kind of cool, and that's going to be important as we continue on, right? My model says it has the Jaredites being all the way from the Olmec in the south to the Adana in the north, the whole continent. Okay, the article from Times and Seasons requotes a Spanish chronicler and seems to equate the Lehites or Mulekites with the Toltec legends, suggesting they formed the city of Tula in the Valley of Mexico. This is huge with my model, right? My model is spot on with this. All right, I believe that Zarahemla started down at Chalcanzingo, but it actually kind of moved its way up to the plateau where the climate was a little bit more favorable. And the Teotihuacan is the city the Laconians built. The Cholula ended up being the center of Zarahemla before too long. Anyway, watch my other articles to see this. But the Toltec Indians actually grew out of those, Teotihuacan and Cholula. Okay, so he says, Lehi went down by the Red Sea to the great southern ocean. See, here we have this again. Same when we had it. Now read Stephen's story. According to Fuentes, the chroniclers of the kingdom of Guatemala, the kings of the Quiche and Cachical were descended from the Toltecan Indians, who, when they came into this country, found it already inhabited by people of different nations. According to the manuscript by Don Juan Torres, the grandson of the last king of the Quiches, the Toltecas, themselves descended from the house of Israel, who were released by Moses from the tyranny of Pharaoh, and after crossing the Red Sea fell into idolatry. And under the guidance of Tanub, their chief passed from one continent to the other, to a place which they called the Seven Caverns, a part of the Kingdom of Mexico, where they founded the celebrated city of Tula. I'm going to release a video soon where I talk about the writings of Fernando Ixtlilxochitl. And Ixtlilxochitl has amazing quote. I mean, he's got huge books. He was an amazing historian. A lot of his stuff on Quetzalcoatl and his historias end up being discounted by scholars, but his later works, like his huge magnum opus where he goes through the history of the Toltecs, is almost universally used by historians. So it's kind of funny that they dismiss the first part because it pushes this idea of multiple transoceanic pre-Columbian travels. Has 3 different landing places of 3 different people. It kind of matches the Book of Mormon. It even talks about descriptions at the time of Christ. It talks about a lot of Book of Mormon stuff. Watch that video. It's pretty amazing. And there's so many of those early chroniclers who just heard so many things from the Native Americans that led them to believe it's like, well, these guys are somehow related to the House of Israel, right? So a lot of people end up thinking Joseph Smith got the idea from them. But anyway, I'll cover all that in that video because I don't think that's incredibly likely. But we'll go through the possibilities. So this is an important quote, though, right? And I think the Toltecs actually fit into the Book of Mormon narrative, right? Their heyday was about 1000 AD. They have some amazing stuff. Okay, we are going to end. Okay, let me just. I hit on all these tangents. It's hard to not hit the tangents. But the important thing about the Toltecs and a lot of those writings of Ixtlilxochitl is the migrations of the Toltecs, right? Because it talks about how that the ancestors of the Aztec and the ancestors of the Toltecs came from Tulancingo, right? And they have this Atzalan that's way up to the north, and some people think it's in Jalisco, and some people think it's in northern Sonora, and others think it's in California. But I say it is in it's in the heartland, eastern United States, right? Almost up by the Great Lakes, but possibly around Spiral Mounds, Oklahoma, Toltec mounds. Anyway, there's some really awesome evidence there. We'll dig into that and we'll see some artifacts that really match with Toltec legends that came out of Spiral Mounds, and even Etowah mounds in Georgia have some pretty cool Toltec evidence. Okay, so keep that in mind though. So Joseph Smith, so in Times and Seasons, this article, it's saying specifically, right, that they came over and founded the city of Tula. It sounds like Nephites to me. Okay, and another side, he says, let us turn our subject, however, to the Book of Mormon, where these wonderful ruins of Palenque are among the mighty works of the Nephites, and the mystery is solved. On the 72nd page of the 3rd, 4th edition of the Book of Mormon, it reads as follows, and it came to pass that we began to prosper. I'll let you read that on your own. blah, blah. And I did teach my people to build buildings and to work all manner of wood. This is talking about Nephi, and copper, and of brass, and of steel, and gold, and silver, and the precious ores, which were great in abundance. And I, Nephi, did build a temple, right, in the city of Nephi. And I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built with so many precious things, for they were not to be found in the land, right? And anyway, so he keeps going. So it talks about the workmanship being exceedingly fine. On page 280 is a full description of the isthmus. Mr. Stephen's great developments of antiquities were made bare to the eyes of all people by reading his history of the Nephites in the Book of Mormon. They lived about the narrow neck of land, which now embraces Central America, right? Mesoamerica. Palenque is right there, right, in Central America. He's referring to northern Guatemala and southern Mexico in this. With all the cities can be found. Read the destructions of the cities of the crucifixion of Christ. Who could have dreamed that 12 years would have developed such incontrovertible testimony at the Book of Mormon? Surely the Lord worketh, and none can hinder. Okay, and we'll get into this a little more. He's saying pretty specifically. Well, let's read the next one, and then we'll talk about it. Right. Okay. So we have the next episode of Times and Seasons. We have another article that the Heartlanders dismiss as not being from Joseph Smith, but the Mesoamerica people say it was definitely from Joseph Smith. It says, since our extract was published from Mr. Stephen's Incidents and Travels, we've found another important factor relating to the truth of the Book of Mormon. Central America, or Guatemala, is situated north of the Isthmus of Darien and once embraced several hundred miles of territory from north to south. The city of Zarahemla, burnt at the crucifixion of our Savior and rebuilt afterwards, stood upon this land, right? Mesoamerica. As will be seen from the following words of the Book of Alma. And now was only distance of a day and a half's journey for a Nephite on the line Bountiful and the land Desolation from the east to the west. And thus the land of Nephi and the land of Zarahemla was nearly surrounded by water, there being a small neck of land between the land northward and the land southward. Okay, now remember, the narrow neck of land that it's talking about right here is north of Zarahemla. Okay, keep that in mind. It is north of Zarahemla. Right, which is why most of the Mesoamerican people think that Zarahemla is south of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, contrary to my model. Right. It is certainly a good thing for the excellency and veracity of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon that the ruins of Zarahemla have been found where the Nephites left them, and that a large stone with engravings upon it, as Mosiah said, and the large round stone with the sides sculptured in hieroglyphics, as Mr. Stevens has published, is also among the left remembrances of him who lost and unknown. We're not going to declare positively that the ruins of Quirigua, right, Quirigua, see if you can pronounce that 10 times fast. I mean, Spanish, right? It's a native. Quirigua are those of Zarahemla. But when the land and the stones and the books tell a story so plain, we are of the opinion that it would require more proof than the Jews could bring to prove the disciples stole the body of Jesus from the tomb, to prove that the ruins of the city in question are not those referred to in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so now we kind of know that they are not the exact ruins of Zarahemla, right? Because they actually date to far later than Book of Mormon times, right? So the city of Quirigua and Palenque both have their heyday after like 500 AD and really closer to 700 AD, right? These are late Mayan sites, which the Mayan heyday in general, right? The Mayan culture really kind of picked up where Teotihuacan ended. Right, and so when Teotihuacan really starts to exert its influence, it ends up conquering Tikal. Tikal kind of starts to rise by 300 AD, but it really doesn't hit its height until around 700 AD, right? And then the entire Mayan Empire kind of starts to collapse around 900 AD. And then it's supplanted by Toltec cities in northern Yucatan, closer to 1300 AD, right, when Chichen Itza and those cities kind of take precedence. So, anyway, it's interesting here, though. Like, notice the wording that he says here, though, right? He says, we're not going to say that this is the exact city, right? So he's obviously offering some doubt, but he's going to say, like, but this is the general area, right? That's what the quote is saying. It's like, we're not going to say that this is the exact city, but it seems like this is probably the right area, right? And he's definitely believing all this evidence that he's seeing in this book, Stephen's Incidents of Travels, right? That's kind of got everybody by catching the world by storm in New England, right? Everyone's reading it and being like, oh, this is so great. It's amazing. It's our first introduction to really Mesoamerican stuff. And he's like, yeah, this is the Book of Mormon. Now, I mean, let's go down through this really quick. Okay, so I'm just going to, because there's an argument here that I cover in the article that the argument from the Heartlanders is that this was all written by Wilford Woodruff, and that it was done without Joseph Smith's knowledge, right? And that Joseph Smith didn't sign off on it, and that he didn't believe it, right? And this is just all Wilford Woodruff's thoughts. That is very much, that's not really a very tenable theory. Like, that is totally disproven by this letter from Joseph Smith to the one who gave him the book, Stephen's Incidents of Travels. Okay, so listen to this letter that he writes to the person who gave him the book of Stephen's Incidents of Travel. He says, "Dear sir, I received your kind present, right, of Stephen Incidents and Travels of Central America by the hand of Elder Woodruff. And I feel myself under many obligations for this mark of your esteem and friendship, which to me is more interesting as it unfolds and develops many things that are of great importance to this generation, and corresponds and supports the testimony of the Book of Mormon. I have read the volumes with the greatest interest and pleasure, and must say that of all the histories that have been written pertaining to the antiquities of this country, it is the most correct and luminous and comprehensive." Right? And he signs it Joseph Smith. Okay, so the idea that I've heard thrown out by heartlander scholars, right? And I think Jonathan Neville kind of even makes this point. He's an amazing scholar. He really is just a fantastic individual as a person and a great scholar. But let me just push back on this idea because I think it's untenable. And I think he'd admit this, right? You have to suggest that Wilford Woodruff is forging Joseph Smith's, like, it's not just that he's writing it in his behalf. He is misrepresenting Joseph Smith because he's writing this in the first person, right? So even if this is Wilford Woodruff's hand, right? Even if he's a scribe writing this, let's say that let's just for a minute take that thought that I've heard those guys push, where Joseph Smith didn't know about this and Wilford Woodruff just wrote this without his knowledge. Like, think how deceptive this would be. Like, this is a serious slander of both Joseph Smith and Wilford Woodruff. How can we trust anything that is signed as being from Joseph Smith if Wilford Woodruff was so, like, almost underhanded, but certainly, like, presumptuous to write a letter and say, "I received your present that came from Elder Woodruff," right? Because they say Wilford Woodruff wrote this letter to John Bernheisel. And so he's misrepresenting Joseph Smith if that's the case. He's saying, "I received your kind present," right, that by the hand of Elder Woodruff, and I'm saying that this really corresponds and supports the testimony of the Book of Mormon, right? And he's saying that he's read the volumes with the greatest interest and pleasure. To say that this is like a forgery by Elder Woodruff, right? I'm sorry, that's pretty underhanded. You're really slandering Wilford Woodruff if you're saying that. And not only that, to have Joseph Smith like somehow pass off on this, and it gets worse, right? Because the same thing. So here we see the actual handwriting, right? And there are scholars, some scholars, definitely all the Mesoamerican scholars, they say, hey, this handwriting is actually. Let me see what it says. Let's just read right here because I did the research. This is, despite the Bernheisel letter, some still protest that John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff may have written the Times and Seasons extracts without Joseph's approval and knowledge of the content. However, scholarship available here, right, you can go to these links, and statistical analysis suggests that Joseph Smith's stylistic influence is the strongest of the three possible editors of the Times and Seasons articles. Additionally, just months before the Times and Seasons editions, with that most of the quotes on Mesoamerican Book of Mormon geography come from, Joseph Smith printed the below statement claiming the explicit responsibility for publications in future episodes of the Times and Seasons, right? Indeed, given the evidence, nothing short of mental gymnastics can support the belief that Joseph Smith did not support a continental model of the Book of Mormon, which includes the lands of south of the United States, which includes Mesoamerica, right? Because this is the note. So look at this. This paper commences my editorial career. This is given just before these ones I just read about, Mesoamerican archaeology matching with the Book of Mormon. This is the episode before of Times and Seasons. This paper commences my editorial career. I alone stand responsible for it and shall do for all papers having my signature henceforth. I am not responsible for the publication or arrangement of the former paper. The matter did not come under my supervision, right? So he's saying now, these future episodes, they're going to be under my direct supervision. But then what they're saying is like, but that was a lie because Woodruff or one of these guys totally wrote these articles in the Times and Seasons, and not only did they write them, Joseph Smith didn't even sign off on it, because surely if Joseph Smith would have read it and signed off on, or he would have been like, wait, this is totally wrong, that the Book of Mormon has nothing to do with Mesoamerica, it only happened here in the heartland, right? I mean, if that was the case, Joseph Smith would have seen it and been like, no, publish this stuff. I just barely put my name on this paper, and the last one said I'm gonna take ownership of all this stuff. That argument is pretty bad. It's sad, and this is why it's sad, because the reason why the Heartland model even like emerged, and it had to emerge, and Rod talks about this, right? He's such a good guy, and I absolutely agree with him, is because there's so many quotes that we're going to cover later on where Joseph Smith is specifically talking about the Heartland and the Nephites and the Book of Mormon. And so you have to dismiss those with all these crazy mental gymnastics, right? And that kind of made him sick a little bit. I mean, even me. It's like the two Cumorah theory, where it's like, well, the actual Cumorah is in Veracruz, and the Cumorah up there isn't actually Cumorah. And anyway, the battle happened in Mexico, and only Moroni brought up. We're going to talk about all that stuff in a second. You dismiss so many quotes by Joseph Smith, and you have to do all these mental gymnastics to try and be like, well, he didn't actually mean that about self. He didn't actually mean that about the plains of the Nephites. All these quotes we're going to go through in a second. But yet they're doing the same thing. Like, how hypocritical. What? Why be a hypocrite? Why do the same thing? Why bend over backwards now to dismiss all these quotes about Mesoamerica? When the whole reason we had to come up with the Heartlander theory is because they were doing that, because the Mesoamerican people were dismissing all these quotes and doing mental gymnastics to dismiss them. Now you're doing the same thing. You're both doing the same thing. You're both holding on to the quotes that are like, support your model, and doing these mental gymnastics to try and be like, no, I mean, Joseph Smith didn't actually believe that he only believed our model was part of the Book of Mormon, not yours. Wait, just keep watching. We're going to go through all of these, and you'll see after it all. And I honestly believe that most sincere Heartlanders, after you watch these videos, right? Read my articles, go through all these quotes, and then see the evidence, and then realize, well, why are we dismissing the other side when we don't have to? Why do that? If there is overwhelming evidence that it happened both in Mesoamerica and in the Heartland, why not hold on to that model? Instead of doing so many mental gymnastics to just because it's not just this, it's the archaeology, it's one thing after another, and you'll see it in all these videos. Like I say, I mean, it's going to be, by the time I finish, hundreds of hours. I've got so much evidence. Like I said, I think more evidence than anyone else has brought forth, right? The model is really amazing. Truly amazing. I don't even know if I can make enough videos, but if you read my articles, I mean, you'll spend hundreds of hours just on them. You could spend tens of hours just looking at my maps, and they're very detailed. Let's keep going, though. Let's keep going. Okay, the next quote that neither side ever really talks very much. There are quotes by Joseph Smith that equate the land of desolation with the southwest United States, northernmost Mexico, southwest four corners area of the United States, all the way into the Great Plains, that is desolation. That fits my model. It does not fit anyone else's model, which is why they all ignore them. They ignore these quotes entirely, right? And they'll do their mental gymnastics to try and dismiss them. But let's go through them, okay? Let's look at the evidence. So Mosiah Hancock recorded a first-hand conversation he had with Joseph Smith, saying that the Nephites lost their power in the southwestern United States or northmost Mexico. Mosiah would have been 10 years old when Joseph was murdered, although his biographical descriptions of that year seemed to be quite vivid. And this quote is included because it's corroborated not only by his father Levi Hancock, who was a close confidant of Joseph Smith and near the same age as Joseph Smith, as well as other quotes below, such as William McBride's quote on Moroni's travels, but also by Joseph's direct quote to Emma, equating Zion's camp with the plains of the Nephites and Zelph during the great struggle of the Lamanites. We'll read about that, where one of them talks about the Jaredites and the land of desolation with the Great Plains. So listen to this quote. Now, Joseph said, I will show you the travels of this people. He then showed our travels through Iowa and said, here you will make a place for the winter, and here you will travel west until you come to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. You will build cities to the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, but the United States will not receive you with the laws which God desires you to live, and you will have to go where the Nephites lost their power. Placing his finger on the map, I should think about where Snowflake, Arizona is situated. That's northern Arizona, close to the Four Corners. I should know I have a bunch of relatives that actually come from one of my lines comes from that area, and my wife's dad was actually born very near there. About where Snowflake, Arizona is situated, or it could have been Mexico, right? Obviously northmost Mexico. So we're talking about Chihuahua and Sonora. Okay, then in another area, Levi Hancock. So Mosiah Hancock's father, he talks about something similar. He says, nothing occurred of any account until we got to Illinois when Joseph Smith said in our tent, I want you to remember what I say to you. The Lord is going to give us dry weather until we get through. He has given us rains that there might be water on the prairies. You will see the movings of the Lord in our favor all the way through. That's during Zion's camp, right? It began to be very pleasant, and soon we entered on the wide prairies. Okay, and it keeps on talking all about where they're going through Zion's camp and these wide prairies. And then it says, he said, this is what I told you. And now, well, let's read it from this point. Joseph Smith, addressing himself to Sylvester Smith, said, this is what I told you. And now I want to tell you that you may know what I meant. This land was called the land of desolation. And Onadages, you can say it Onadages or Onadages, was the king, and a good man was he. There in that mound did he bury his dead, and did not dig holes as the people do now, but they brought their dirt and covered them until you see they have raised it to be about 100 feet high. The last man buried was Zelph, or Telph. He was a white Lamanite who fought with the people of Onadagas for freedom. These words he said as the camp was moving off the mounds. We're going to talk about this whole Zelph story toward the end when I get into all the other quotes for the Heartland, right? Because they're great ones. But what I want to really hit on here is he is not equating this area where they found Zelph, which is very close to where the Heartlanders kind of put their land as Zarahemla, right? Kind of close to Nauvoo, really, just Iowa, just west of Nauvoo. He's not saying this is Zarahemla, right? This is in their land, Zarahemla. So they say it's in Zarahemla, but here in this quote, he's saying that it's desolation. He's saying the wide prairies, right, was the land called the land of desolation. And I want you to remember that. It's very interesting, right? No trees, desolate for trees. And the people are living in tents, like it says in the Book of Mormon. So there's kind of, maybe that's where, if you don't believe this, that's where he got the idea, but he's equating desolation with the prairies. All right, let's keep going though. So that's in Levi Hancock's autobiography, in his biography. Yeah, it's in his autobiography. So his journal entries. So from W.W. Phelps, who echoes Levi Hancock, although he does not directly attribute this information to Joseph Smith, it corroborates both Hancock's, like both Levi and Nephi Hancock's articles, which place the Jaredites in North America, stretching from sea to sea. So this one is talking about the Jaredites, right? And we're going to go through that too, because anyway, there's a lot of quotes that the Jaredites covered the whole continent. So, but here he talks about desolation. So what the design of our Heavenly Father was or is as to these vast prairies of the far west, I know no further than we have revelation. The Book of Mormon terms them, the prairies, he's talking about, terms them the land of desolation. So here we have another quote that is corroborating Levi Hancock's idea that the prairies are the land of desolation, right? And specifically in the other one, he's talking about the prairies where they found Zelph. And when I get into a prairie so large that I'm out of sight of timber, just as the seaman is out of sight of land in the ocean, I have to exclaim, what is man and his works compared to the Almighty? Anyway, you can read the rest of them. Then moving on. Although the Zarahemla area of Orson Pratt's geographic model conflicts with Joseph, and he changed over time, Orson's views on the Jaredite lands stood firm in placing the Jaredite desolation as Moron, or the land of inheritance, per Ether 7:5-6, just south of the Gulf of California, right in the Mazatlan area. Fittingly, with Joseph's continental model, Orson also believed Omer fled from desolation near the Gulf of California to New England, right? And we'll talk a bit about Orson Pratt. Orson Pratt's model, he ends up saying that Zarahemla is in Colombia, right? So he believed the Magdalena River in Colombia was Zarahemla. So kind of contrary to what is stated in the Times and Seasons articles, right? Signed off by Joseph Smith. Orson Pratt gives a different model where he thinks that the Panama Canal is the narrow neck. The Isthmus of Panama is the narrow neck, and that Zarahemla and Nephi are like in the Andes, right? And we talked about that in another model, how that just doesn't work because it's too wide. There's a lot of people who have that model. You have to go through my scriptures that really detail those southern wars and Alma 1551, where Alma creates the new border. Now it specifies the distance really between the east and west, the city of Moroni in the east sea, and the city by the sea in the west, that the stripling warriors end up defending all the way through Manti in the middle. Anyway, we'll talk about that, how that South America absolutely does not work with that, right? And it conflicts with Joseph Smith stuff, and it ends up conflicting with a lot of the archaeology. Okay, so let's keep going there, though. Like I said, I put all the quotes on here. I'm trying to hide anything. This is probably the most comprehensive list of quotes that you'll find, and I'm not cutting little parts out that I think don't correlate with my model. I'm even putting Orson Pratt stuff here, even though it's completely counter to my model, because I don't think he got it from Joseph Smith, because he never says I got it from Joseph Smith. I'm only putting quotes that are attributed directly to Joseph Smith or corroborate a quote from Joseph Smith. Okay. So 2 separate maps found in the church archives and attributed to William McBride and Andrew Hamilton, right, quite a bit after Joseph Smith, decades after Joseph Smith, in Richfield, Utah, with the text, "Got it from Joseph Smith with the prophet," right? So here we have a quote attributed directly to Joseph Smith. These were contemporaries to Joseph Smith, about the same age as Joseph Smith, but they don't start talking about this until they're in Utah, in Richfield, right? Decades after. So we're talking about, some of these are like in 1870s, so like 30 years after Joseph died, right? He writes on it, "Got it from Joseph Smith the prophet." They corroborate the above quotes, the Mosiah Hancock and the Levi Hancock quotes. They closely echo the first Mosiah Hancock quote by detailing the travels of Moroni, starting in Central America, right? See the text on the second map. These maps were likely part of the narrative told throughout southern Utah in the 1880s by Joseph Smith's contemporaries concerning his prophecies of the saints' future travels and how they would mirror those of the ancient Nephites. Okay, now check out this map. Okay, so these maps are rejected by both the Heartlanders and the Mesoamerican because they don't fit their narrative, right? So you can go to the link and you can find the exact writing on here. I have actually kind of put these maps right here, and since the cursive is a little hard to read, I have transcribed writing of all the cursive, but you can see here that he's got this travels of Moroni. Let me just make it big here. Right, so he's saying that Moroni started, right here you can say Central America, exactly like Mosiah Hancock said, right? So starting in Central America, he says it's the land of bountiful. So here we have the land of bountiful in Central America, and then he goes up to the sand hills, right? Sand hills of south part of Arizona, right by Snowflake, Arizona, where Mosiah Hancock said. So he's saying Moroni went up through there, like dedicated the temple, and then made his way all the way back to Cumorah, right, through Adamant-Ammon and Nauvoo, and then came all the way back twice, right? Or he's saying that the saints, right? It's hard to say exactly what he's saying, but so just look here. He's kind of talking about the travels of Moroni from these places to Kirtland, Ohio, to Pike County, Illinois. Talks about the Kinderhook plates, which a lot of people think are frauds. Some people think they're not frauds. It's up to you. Where they were found, Moroni travels starting from Central America to the Sandhills, then to Salt Lake, then to Adamant-Ammon, then to Nauvoo, then to Independence, then to Kirtland, then to Cumorah. Okay, very interesting. There's 2 of these maps, but they both say the same thing, right? And this is because their belief that Brigham Young said that the Manti temples and the St. George temples did not need to be dedicated, right? That they had, or at least the spots had already been dedicated by Moroni as he traveled through there. And then Mosiah Hancock reiterates this and then says that the Nephites themselves traveled through there, and that's where the Nephites lost their power. They're right here in Desolation is where the Nephites lost their power. All right, let's go back up through here. We're going to read through this list. So read through this a little more. Brother McBride also related that Joseph Smith marked with his cane in the sand the track the saints would take to the Rocky Mountains. Says Joseph, "You will establish the kingdom. Will you establish the kingdom there? No, but it will be set up, and the saints will live their covenants," meaning the marriage covenant, and said we should travel on through the mountains, describe the valleys of the Great Salt Lake, just as he had lived there, designating where the soldiers' camp would be and the burying ground. Said we should make stations and build up settlements all the way to New and Old Mexico, right? To New Mexico and Old Mexico, Four Corners area and Northwest Mexico, just like Mosiah Hancock said, until we cross the isthmus and get back to the place where the covenant was broke, right? In other words, the United Order by the Nephites. He spoke of the great temple in Central America unfinished. Like, what temple is he talking about, right? He's talking about either Bountiful or Zarahemla or Nephi. That's where the great temples are, right? This temple was situated by the river Copan, anciently called the river of Nephi, right? So that's once again in that area by Palenque, the river Copan that he's thinking. Doesn't match my model, but it's really pretty much right there in the same area. He spoke of the route the old Nephites took traveling to Cumorah from the south and southwest, right? So this is very important. The old Nephites took traveling to Cumorah from the south and southwest. Same thing as he said right there. They're traveling through the desert southwest and having to bury their treasures as they journeyed, and finally burying the records and precious things in the hill Cumorah of Moroni, dedicating the temple site of what we now call St. George, and Nauvoo, and Jackson County, and Kirtland, and others we know not of as yet. Right, so the two Cumorah people will just completely dismiss all this, right? They'll say like, well, there's just no way any of that has anything to do with it. Maybe some of them might be like, well, okay, well, maybe after the final battle, Moroni went through there carrying the huge plates, alone. But they have to dismiss the idea that these guys had, that the Nephites, the group of Nephites themselves, traveled through here, and that this is desolation, and that Cumorah is actually, that Cumorah, like he says here, is in New York. Okay, so although there's ambiguity in the above quotes as to whether the old Nephites that Lowell and McBride were referring to as the whole of the Nephite nation, or just a few survivors with Moroni, right, as possibly suggested by a Brigham Young quote given around the same date, we will demonstrate later in this paper that Joseph Smith most certainly believed the entire Nephite nation met its end in upstate New York, right? So that argument really doesn't hold water when you get to the number of quotes there are that suggest, and even by Brigham Young, that the final battle was in Cumorah, right? So the argument does not really hold water. That's why the Heartland model exists. Again, the maps, when combined with Mosiah Hancock's quote, which shares similar verbiage, suggest that the Saints' travels out from New York were a sort of reverse migration from the travels of Moroni and the whole of the Nephite people on their way to Cumorah, right, which is labeled in New York in the map, right, Cumorah, New York. A bit more information can be found at this link. You can follow the links. But let me just read these one more time. Okay, the next day the prophet came to our home, stopped in our carpenter shop, and stood by the turning lathe. I went and got my map for him. Now, he said, I will show you the travels of this people, the saints, right? And then he showed our travels through Iowa and said, here you will make a place for the winter, and you'll travel until you come to the Great Salt Lake, right? And he said, the United States will not have you. You have to go where the Nephites lost their power. So we have all these quotes really equating the fact that the Nephites came through the Four Corners area, and that's where desolation was, and that's where they ended up losing their power, right? Because in the Book of Mormon, the land of desolation is where they kind of make their last stand, and then they get beat so bad that from there on they're just fleeing, right? It says that specifically, right, in both Mormon and Moroni. So that's what he's talking about here. Obviously, go and read it for yourself. You'll see I'm telling the truth here. These maps are also corroborated by a number of late-dated quotes repeating Brigham Young's belief that Manti and St. George temples were dedicated personally by Moroni. Hemer C. Kimpel quoted Brigham as saying, here in Manti is the spot where the prophet Moroni stood and dedicated this piece of land for a temple site. Anyway, you can come and read this. He talks about the Ghanaians being in that area, talks about the St. George temple being dedicated. Really, both of those are problematic for Heartlanders and Meso people. They're problematic for Meso people for the reasons we already talked about, because they think even though Moroni might have wandered through there, the nation of the Nephites didn't, right? And there's parts of all these quotes that are wrapped up in them meeting their demise in Cumorah. And the Heartlanders, it totally doesn't work for them either, because their Nephites aren't coming over to the west and then heading back east. And even the whole idea that it's like, so everything happened just back east, and they make their way from Ohio. Do we even have a map here? Let me see. I think we do. Here's a map. You can see my cursor. So for Heartlanders, you think that the Iowa, right, and Illinois, this region here in Missouri and Iowa, is Zarahemla, and that they made their way to Bountiful, which is right here, the top of the Ohio and up into the peninsula, and then they come over the lakes for some reason and then back down, and they do the great battle in Cumorah. Why on earth is Moroni? I mean, it's just as bad as the two Cumorah Meso people. Like, they're saying that Moroni, then after he died, after the nation was destroyed and he didn't die, he comes all the way over to Utah, wanders around, dedicates the temple, and then goes all the way back to bury the plates again. Or this happens after he buries the plates completely, because he had to bury the plate. We'll get into that later. Okay, so anyway, you can come through here, read some more. I just want to hit the fact that if you haven't seen my model in my other videos, watch it. But my model is really supported by a lot of evidence, like so much evidence. And I touch on a little bit of it in this article. For instance, the Uto-Aztec and language family, right? Look how it stretches right from where he's saying in Mesoamerica all the way up the narrow strip, of the West Mexican coast into the Southwest area and then into the plains. Right, and the Uto-Aztecan language is really the only one where they found really substantial, Brian Stubbs found substantial evidence for Hebrew within that language group. Not only that, it fits. So, here's my model. If you haven't seen the other videos, you can just kind of pause the video here and you can take a look and you can see where I'm having the land of Nephi, all of the Mayan lands that the Meso people, the most of the Mayan land models, the Grijalba and Usumacinta, right? That is part of my land of first inheritance, land of Ishmael, land of Limhi. Those are all Lamanite lands, land of Nephi, Oaxaca and Monte Alban. The land of Zarahemla is the Balsas Depression, right? And then they migrate their way up to Cholula. That ends up being the main city of Zarahemla. That's after they've kind of migrated from Chalcanzingo, which is the original Zarahemla, where they find the people of Zarahemla. And then they come up the West Mexican coast. We've got the narrow passes on either side, which in my model are separate from the narrow neck of land. The narrow neck of land being kind of this main delimiter between the land northward and the land southward that nothing actually happens on. It's always by the narrow neck, not on the narrow neck. It's by the narrow neck, right? And that's Baja California, right? And I think they also kind of saw this as a narrow neck almost because the way they saw the world is that the Gulf of California is like this big bite out of things. This is Turtle Island, and the head is down here, and the neck's through here. Anyway, I'll go through this in other videos. And also my evidence of destruction in the Four Corners, and then their migration east. And the whole idea that the Mesoamerican group, the whole reason why they came up with two Cumorahs in the first place is that they think big groups like back then wouldn't travel thousands of miles, right? And they couldn't travel thousands of miles with the plates. It's such a ridiculous argument. It's so poor. Because the saints did it. I mean, right? The saints didn't have cars. They weren't all riding on horses either. They're taking hand carts across the plains, thousands of miles. Like 300,000 people took the Oregon Trail to go to California and Oregon. Like the Goths went way further than that, traveling from the Black Sea to Spain and to, like, history is full of groups of hundreds of thousands of people making migrations thousands of miles, right? In the Book of Mormon, to have these huge groups of people, 100,000 people that over like a 60-year period migrate to their doom. Of course they're going to go thousands of miles. Well, you think they're going to go 200 miles and be like, oh, this is as far as we can go. Sorry, honey, kids, you got to take some weapons up and fight to your death. But I'm too tired. I don't want to go any further. Like, bullcrap. They're going to go thousands of miles until they cannot go any further before they have to give weapons to their wives and children to fight to their death. It's a silly argument. And when it comes to the land of many waters and desolation, just look at a satellite map. It's like the most obvious answer. Where's the land of many waters? Well, look at this map. Where does it look like there's many waters? The eastern United States, the Great Lakes, right? It's obvious. Where's desolation? Where the big deserts are. Desolation, right? Where there's no trees. Where it's desolate, right? Anyway, and I have tons of evidence from, like we talked about Ixtlilxochitl already a little bit. There's so much evidence. Watch my other videos. We're not going to get at there. I just put it in here so you have a little bit of bite. Let's continue on. There's so much evidence for the Heartlanders have put together. They've done such a fantastic job of helping people understand that you cannot dismiss the quotes that the Book of Mormon also took place in the eastern United States, because it did, and that Cumorah is Cumorah. The final battle happened in New York, not Veracruz. Okay, let's keep going though. So, the fourth section, quotes suggesting Joseph Smith believed Cumorah and the final battle to be in New York and much of North America to be Book of Mormon land northward. Okay? Or at least the land of the Nephites and the Lamanites. An epistle from Joseph Smith the prophet to the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints dated from Nauvoo, Illinois, September 1842 shows explicitly that Joseph believed the location where Moroni appeared before giving him the plates was Cumorah, right? It turns out to be in D&C 128 by Revelation. Again, what do we hear? Glad tidings from Cumorah, Moroni. An angel from heaven declaring the fulfillment of the prophets, the book revealed, right? So obviously he's talking about Moroni from Cumorah. If you're a Meso person and you believe Cumorah is actually in Veracruz, you kind of have to dismiss this and be like, well, he's not actually saying that Moroni appeared to him on Cumorah. He's just saying that he saw in a vision a hill Cumorah with the angel on top of it, and that hill was actually in Veracruz or something like that. Mental gymnastics, right? You can make up a lot of things, but they're all mental gymnastics. The most logical and rational reading of the scripture is exactly what the Heartlanders say. He's talking about the hill of Cumorah in New York, and that's where Moroni appeared to him. Okay, Joseph and Alvar also said the following in a letter to W. W. Phillips. You are acquainted with the mail road from Palmyra. At about 1 mile west, it rises another ridge of less height running parallel to the former, leaving a beautiful vale between. The soil is the first quality for the country, and under the state of cultivation which gives the prospect to one's opposing reflects on the fact that here, between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and Nephites were destroyed. By turning to the 529th and 530th pages of the Book of Mormon, we'll read Moroni's account, the last great struggle of his people, and they were encamped around this hill. Right? Handwriting of Oliver Cowdery shares pages with dedicated Joseph Smith history, Joseph Smith papers. Okay, so once again, if you're a heartlander, if you're a Meso person and you think that the final battle happened in Veracruz and the hill Cumorah is actually the original hill Cumorah is actually in Veracruz, then you have to dismiss this. You have to be like, well, this was just Oliver Cowdery talking without Joseph Smith's knowledge. You have to do the exact same thing that the Heartlanders are going to do with the Meso quotes, right? They're both doing the exact same thing. You have to be like, well, Oliver Cowdery's kind of like speaking on behalf of Joseph Smith here, but he's kind of perjuring himself because Joseph Smith didn't believe this at all. Or you just have to be like, well, Joseph Smith had no idea none of them had any idea where it happened, which is what a lot of Meso model people kind of think. So in 1856, Heber C. Kimball gave a talk in which he gave suggesting first or possibly second-hand information about the vision that Joseph Smith and others had concerning the hill Cumorah in New York. This vision gave information to them about the cave in which was stored all the sacred engravings, or as was seen in this vision. Okay, more records than 10 men could carry. This is the quote from Heber C. Kimball in the Journal of Discourses. He says, the vision that Joseph Smith and others had went into the cave in the hill Cumorah and saw more records than 10 men could carry. There were books piled on tables, books there, events I heard Joseph Smith. Okay, so anyway, if you believe this, right, because there's lots of these quotes. There's several of them. There's another one down below. I don't think I'm going to read through all of these. You can go through them because there are really a number of quotes talking about their visions of the room inside of the actual hill Cumorah, right? Like in this one right here, attending a meeting, a discourse from W.W. Phelps, who related a story told him by Hiram Smith, which was as follows. Joseph, Hiram, Cowdery, and Whitner went to the hill Cumorah as they were walking. So we're talking about New York for sure. As they were walking up the hill, a door opened. They walked into a room about 16 foot square. In that room was an angel and a trunk. On that trunk lay the Book of Mormon, gold plates, Laban's sword, Aaron's breastplate, right? So this is like a record room. And like I say, so the Meso people, they think that the record room, right, all the records that were moved from the hill Shem to the hill Cumorah is in Veracruz still, because they obviously, Moroni didn't single-handedly bring all the records up to North America. He just brought one, and even that is kind of a stretch, right? Whereas the Heartlander people think, I don't even know, I've never even heard any of them say where the hill Shem was. I'd be curious. Leave a note in the comments if you've heard anyone like Rod or Jonathan or Wayne may say where the hill Shem was exactly. I don't know if they speculate on that. If they watch this, leave a comment on here. But anyway, so remember they had the hill Shem was in desolation, but they moved the records from the hill Shem to hill Cumorah because desolation was about to be overtaken by the armies of the Lamanites, right? And then they hide all the records in Cumorah, so there's a room of records, and then just a subset, just the plates, right, and the shield and the things that were actually in this box they took out of that record room and buried separately in the little crypt that Joseph Smith found, the plates and the Urim and Thummim and the breastplate and the spectacles, right? Those were all in a separate location. So Meso people are going to think those are two separate, like one's in Veracruz and one's in New York. Whereas Heartlanders are going to think they're both probably in the actual hill Cumorah. Why would they think that? There's tons of quotes that substantiate it. Okay, so in my model, right, I think that, like I say, over like a 60-year period, the flight from Zarahemla to Cumorah takes place over a far longer period of time than the flight of the Saints from New York to Salt Lake, right? The Saints, I have this written down. I'm in a bunch of my articles, but I think if I remember right, it's like 40 years period of time from 1820, 1830 when the Saints are in New York, then they move to Ohio, then they move to Nauvoo, then to Far West, and then to Utah. And they're just trying to escape persecution, but they're building all these cities as they go over like this, 30-year period. And in the end of it, it's like almost 100,000 people end up making that journey, and a bunch of them are making the journey from Europe, so way further. So and a lot of them come up the Mississippi River, right? And then they get dropped off by boat and then have to make the overland trip. So I make my model is that people are coming mostly by boat up the west coast of Mexico. They're taking boats down my river Sidon, right, which is the Balsas River. They're taking boats there, or some are going overland and taking the Rio Santiago and Rio Lerma down through Guadalajara and to the ocean. But they're getting from the land of Zarahemla to the west coast of Mexico, which is also where Haggith took off, and where the Polynesians come from, and you can read the Mindanao archives and all this stuff that substantiates my model. And then they're coming up West Mexico, which is all over in the Spanish manuscripts too. They're coming up to West Mexico, up this narrow strip, this defensive pass in West Mexico, and then they're coming up the Colorado River, and they hit the Colorado River to the Salt River, up into the Phoenix Basin, and then they make an overland route from basically the top of the Salt River through the Four Corners region, which all started about, at the time when the Nephites are coming up northward, into the land northward. They're settling the Four Corners region, which is why the Hopi and a lot of those Native Americans in the Four Corners region, just like Mosiah Hancock said, they are descendants of the Nephites, right? That is the final land of desolation. It stretches all the way from halfway up Sonora to the Four Corners region, right? So they would have been bringing things by boat, and there's only 2 little spots where they'd have to bring them overland. So one spot would be from the top of the Salt, the Gila River, to basically the Arkansas River. And it's probably about a 200-mile stretch, right, that you have to go an overland route. But once you hit the Arkansas River, then you can once again take rivers all the way down the Arkansas, and then up the Mississippi, and then up the Ohio. And the end of the Ohio, the end of the road, you could say, is Cumorah, right? And there's only like another, 100-mile stretch from the top of the Ohio River, the Ohio branch of the Mississippi River, to actual Cumorah. So there's only like these 2 little stretches, and I think it makes far more sense that all the plates and all the stuff is being brought when the entire group, right? Thousands of people are making this journey over like a 60-year period, right? And they're building cities along the way just like the saints did. And just like a lot of the saints in Brigham Young, they're bringing their furniture out, they're bringing all sorts of stuff out because people who have money and worth can hire porters to carry them across the overland route, and there's people who their job is to go back and forth in these areas by boat and by thing and carry everyone's stuff. That makes way more sense. Like you could carry a ton of stuff over that 60-year period anywhere that you need to by having all these people to help you than the idea that Moroni himself is carrying all the plates like in a backpack or something, trying not to get killed, and he's just making this journey alone or with a group of 5 people or something like that, going thousands of miles. Big groups go thousands of miles. Like read about the Gothic migrations in Europe. There's so many examples, even without horses. The Native Americans use dogs, right? You can read about that too. They drag their teepees along the plains with big pack dogs. So they did have pack animals. They're just dogs, and they use these sleighs, or they just drag them behind like the teepees. Okay, so let's keep going. All right, we're just gonna skip a bunch of this. We're gonna talk about another one here by Whitmer, where he says, he gets interviewed, and he's like, "Where are the plates now? In a cave, where the angel has hidden them up until the time arrives when the plates which are sealed shall be translated." So he's talking about the cave room, right? He's like, "Where's that cave?" In the state of New York. Polson, in the Hill Cumorah? No, but not far away from that place. Obviously saying Cumorah is, the record room is in by Cumorah in New York. More here. Recollections of the conversation of Joseph Smith with his mother, Lucy Mack, shows the Hill Cumorah was in the New York area. The fact that I had learned to be a little cautious about matters with regard to Joseph, for I was accustomed to see him look as he did on that occasion, I could not easily mistake the cause thereof. Presently he smiled in a calm tone. He said, "I have taken the severest chastisement I have ever had in my life." My husband, supposing that it was from some of the neighbors, was quite angry and observed, "I would like to know what business anyone has to find fault with you." "Stop, Father, stop," said Joseph. "It was the angel of the Lord. As I passed by the Hill Cumorah where the plates are, the angel met me and said that I had not been engaged enough in the work of the Lord." Right. Once again, Cumorah is Cumorah. Only one Cumorah. And to be fair, like Mesoamerican proponents do not believe in 2 Cumorahs. Okay, they believe there's one Cumorah and that it's in Veracruz, and they believe that the hill in New York isn't actually Cumorah, right? But the reason why the Heartlanders accuse them of saying that they believe in 2 Cumorahs is because they kind of do. The true Cumorah, which is the Cumorah that they believe is in Veracruz, and then the Cumorah that the early prophets and apostles referred to as Cumorah, right? So they're not saying that there's 2 Cumorahs in the Book of Mormon. They're just saying that those guys are saying there's 2 Cumorahs, one in the Book of Mormon, which is separate from the one that all Joseph Smith and the early apostles and prophets talked about. Right. Does that make sense? So anyway, to be fair, just to make that clear, Mesoamerican proponents do not believe in 2 Cumorahs, but they kind of do. All right. So remember that the Book of Mormon explicitly states that the final battle happened around the Hill Cumorah, and that location was where all the records were hidden, right? So to suggest that the revelation of D&C 128 and that the above quotes are not the same hill as mentioned in the Book of Mormon is to suggest that there are 2 Cumorahs. I'm trying to make that point. And just so you know, like in Mormon 6, right, that he hides them all. Just listen to what it says, just so we are on the same page, that the vault is in the hill Cumorah. And I, Mormon, wrote an epistle unto the king of the Lamanites, and desired him that he would grant unto us that we might gather together our people unto the land of Cumorah, by a hill which was called Cumorah, and there we could give him battle, right? So the Book of Mormon is making a specific mention that the battle was on a hill Cumorah. And then quickly back down in 6, he says, the Lord, that I should not suffer the records which had been handed down by our fathers, which were sacred, right, which were in the hill Shem, and he's now transferred, to fall into the hands of the Lamanites, for the Lamanites would destroy them. Therefore I made this record out of the plates of Nephi, and I did hide up in the hill Cumorah all the records which had been entrusted unto me by the hands of the Lord, save it were these few plates which I gave into my hand, son Moroni. So that's where we get that there's a record vault, right? And that he moved all the records from Shem, and that they built a vault. Now let me hit at this point. A lot of people say that like it's impossible for there to be a record room in the hill Cumorah because it's a drumlin. Okay, so I'm a geologist. It's sad. I've actually heard a few geologists make this argument, and I hope that if you're watching this and you hear anyone say this, you can put this to rest, because it's garbage, right? It's completely, I get where they're coming from, but it's completely garbage. Just let me explain to you, and you can look up an article in Wikipedia yourself, right? But it's pretty simple. A drumlin is when you have a normal hill, right? And you have a huge glacial mass. So you have this big, whether it's a continental glacier, like in the case of northern New York, or whether you've got a localized glacier. Anytime you have a big glacier and it takes a hill, usually a bedrock hill, and it just kind of smears the thing, right? And then it creates these kind of ridges, and I'll show a picture of them. So you have two aspects of those hills always. You have the original bedrock hill, right, that is upstream from the ice, and it remains bedrock, right? And it stays bedrock. And you can easily dig a cave in that thing. And then you have the smear, the downstream, down ice stream smear, right, that composes the mass of the drumlin. And that's all just going to be sand and talus and big rocks. So in that area, it would probably be hard, especially in New York, because there's big rocks, to create a cave in it. Not impossible, because there's a lot of sand involved in it too. So if you were to find a sand and it was partially lithified, which happens, and you get some highly compacted sand because there's a lot of carbonate or something in it, and so you could actually dig into that sand. But for the most part, you're going to have a bunch of rock, and that's going to be really hard to make a cave that like doesn't collapse, right? And so that's where this myth comes. You still could have a cave in two parts of it. One, if they found a section of it that was mostly sand, right, unconsolidated sand, but not big boulders, or two, in the original upstream section. And believe it or not, like if you can get a macrostrat, right, I mean, that's what I do for a living, making geologic maps. Just hop on macrostrat and you can explore the geology of the hill Cumorah yourself, and you'll see that those formations, in fact, I'll do it really quick. Let me just show you really quick. Let's just hop on here. We're going to dig up macrostrat, which is a thing that I've actually helped these guys make this geologic map of the entire United States. Super awesome. I've made one for Utah. So if you go to macrostrat, you can see the geology, and you'll read that there's actually salt deposits in these layers, these Paleozoic limestones and sandstones that make up the hill Cumorah. Okay, here we are in macrostrat, and you can see these linear features here, right? You see them a little better in Google Earth. The resolution on this elevation layer isn't great, but this is the Sacred Grove, right? And all of these are being formed by that glacier, just like scraping its way along, and there's the Sacred Grove right there, right? And if you click on this, it'll actually take you to show you that this is like the Camillus formation, Syracuse formation, right? You can see the lithology of these. This is what I want to show you here. So it's shale, dolostone, gypsum, and salt. That's pretty huge. Okay, I haven't like seen the actual notes of the geologists who are exploring these units, but if there's layers of gypsum and salt, there's a lot of those where I live, right? They're really easy to make. Like if you want to make a cave, finding a gypsum vein is the easiest way to make a cave. And not only that, gypsum, because gypsum is a type of salt, right? Along with anhydrite, it's a precipitate. But the thing that when you have these layers of gypsum, because they're full of the salt, it basically will suck the moisture out of the cave. So it'll create a very dry cave environment in the right conditions, right? As long as you don't have springs coming into it, which if you have springs coming into it, the gypsum will just be gone, right? It dissolves in fresh water really readily. But that's super awesome, right? Because if they were to find an area that had a very tight shell above that salt layer, and then were to dig a cave in the salt and the gypsum, not only would making a cave super easy, it would also make a very dry environment that could mummify bodies that were in there, but could be great for manuscripts, right? To keep them dry. As long as no moisture got in there. If there's humidity in the air or anything, then it could actually be something that just wreak havoc on any artifacts that were in there. Anyway, so very interesting. Let's get back to it, though. Let's hop back into our article and hit our last couple points here really quick. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of these last quotes, and we're going to kind of breeze through a couple of these. You can go read them yourself if you want more detail than what we're going to read. But number 5, we have quotes concerning the Nephites, Lamanites living in the United States region and central U.S. natives being descendants of Book of Mormon peoples. Right? Joseph Smith specifically stated the Book of Mormon was written by the forefathers of the western tribes, likely referring to the natives of west of Nauvoo, which include the Cherokee and natives relocated in the Indian Removal Act to Oklahoma Territory in the 1830s. No, he does not say that the tribes of the east or south or Mexico, but particularly singles out those of the western United States, west of Nauvoo. Right? He says the Book of Mormon. This is a Joseph Smith direct quote from a letter that he wrote. The Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians, having been found through the ministration of the holy angel translated to our own language by the gift and power of God, after having been hid up in the earth for the last 1,400 years, containing the word of God which was delivered unto them. By it we learn that our western tribes of Indians are descended from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is promised land unto them. Right? And unto all the tribes of Israel will come with as many Gentiles as shall comply. Right, and this should be obvious, and actually kind of a cool thing when you think about it. Like some of the biggest reservations in the United States really are in 2 locations. One of them, Oklahoma Territory, which is just right there next to Independence, Missouri. So Joseph Smith even says that that the Native Americans are going to play a major part in the building of Zion in Independence, Missouri. And it makes sense that he puts it right there, less than 100 miles away from all of those tribes in the Oklahoma Territory. And then the second largest reservations are right there in the Four Corners and Utah. So it's like the Saints are put right next to the Native Americans. And the whole message of the Book of Mormon is that if you want to make it through this big transition that's coming, where the wrath of the Lord, the arm of the Lord is going to fall upon the nations of the Gentiles, including the United States of America, if you want to make it through, you need to be associated with the house of Israel, with the Native Americans, right? And he says, after these great blessings that have come on the colonialists, if you, after the huge amount of blessing that made the colonialists of Europe the strongest power in earth, the justice of the Lord is going to come upon them. They got the land for one cycle, right? One 500-year cycle from the time of Columbus to about now. And it says the arm of the Lord is then going to fall on them, because you have these 500-year cycles I go over in another video. And as soon as that 520-year cycle turns over, then suddenly these pandemics and wars and everything are going to be unleashed on the Gentiles. And if you want to make it through and be able to be in a good spot in the next dispensation, you need to become part of the house of Israel, because the promises of the Lord are unto the house of Israel, especially those who have mixed with the Native Americans, right? After they've been scattered, they're going to be restored again. They're going to be key players in the rebuilding of Zion. And so, of course that those are the descendants of the people in the Book of Mormon, right? The Nephite nation all got pushed up there into the land of desolation, into the land of Shem, Cahokia to the Four Corners and Anasazi lands of Chaco, that entire area. They're right there, and their descendants are right there by the LDS people in both areas, Utah and Missouri. Anyway, it's kind of cool. So I'm going to breeze through a couple of these. In the Wentworth letter, there is a lot of quotes, right? The remnants are the Indians that now inhabit this country, the United States, right? He was informed concerning the Aboriginal inhabitants of this country. He's talking about the United States. Revelation given through the prophet. This is in D&C 28. Saying to you shall go unto the Lamanites. He's saying specifically that those Native Americans are the descendants of the Nephites and Lamanites. Shall be in the borders of the Lamanites. Read these quotes. It's hard to get away from it. If you're a Meso person, you have to then think, well, these are just because they believe the Lamanites and the Nephites were just very small groups, right? Really small groups within Caminal Juyu and Santa Rosa and the Chiapas Depression, or if you're a Sumacinta guy, it's a small group in there, and so they just think that some part of that group then came up to North America. But anyway, I think that's pretty hard to square with these quotes, where he really seems to believe that most of the Native Americans Americans that are in this area of North America have some kind of blood of Israel in them, which is my belief too, which is what my model totally supports, right? The Book of Mormon people were the largest groups in the entire continent, right? Teotihuacan, anyway. Basically, I'm pushing the idea that just like in Israel might have been a tiny nation, but God put them as like the salt or leaven within the biggest empires of the world, right? Within Rome, within Egypt, within Babylon, like the biggest cities and biggest empires in the world, Israel is put into them as this major political and religious force. And that's what my model has, right? That's why I say that Teotihuacan is like the city of Laconias, even though Zarahemla is a little bit south. Like they are being the main religious force within the largest empire that ever touched the North American continent, Teotihuacan, and then again with the Toltecs. Anyway, okay, let's keep going. So, Revelation given through Joseph Smith, we have DNC 133, into the wilderness along the Lamanites. There's just a lot in the DNC 54. Shall take your journey into the regions westward, into the land of Missouri, unto the borders of the Lamanites. Once again, that Oklahoma territory where all those reservations are, even to this day. That's the Lamanites. Okay, the promises of the Lord are unto them. That's why the city of Zion is going to be built by them, right? We're going to help them right there in Missouri when the United States collapses and a new nation is built out of its ashes sometime in the future. Entry into the history of the church. During our travels, we visited several of the mounds which had been thrown up by the ancient inhabitants of this country, right? Nephites, Lamanites, etc. So then I think this is where we get into talking about Zelph in Zion's camp. So here he's saying they discovered a skeleton of man, almost entire, and between his ribs, the stone point of the Lamanite arrow, which evidently produced his death. Let's not go into that right yet, because I have all the quotes of Zelph. We get another thing of Tower Hill. I gave the place in consequence of the remains of an old Nephite altar or tower that stood there. He's saying specifically, right? Remember, we already have the quote about the plains of the Nephites that he sends to Emma, where Joseph's hand is saying specifically that the places where they went in Zion's camp were the plains of the Nephites, not just the Lamanites, the Nephites. In fact, here it is right here. So here we have the letter to Emma Smith from Joseph's own hand, right, in Zion's camp. He says, the whole of our journey in the midst of so large a company of social honest men and sincere men wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mountains, the once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their skulls and their bones as proof of its divine authenticity, and gazing upon a country, the fertility, splendor, and the goodness. Anyway, I have links here. Go and read the entire thing in its first-hand source if you'd like. I just want to hit on the fact this is why the Heartland model exists. You can't read this stuff and not make Joseph Smith into a fool, right? You have to be like, oh, he had no idea what he was talking about. You have to be like, no, it all happened in Mesoamerica, and Moroni came up and maybe a couple stragglers, but it just obviously didn't know what he was talking about, because here he's saying that is the land of the Nephites. Like, really? Anyway. When he has his vision of Zelph, it says specifically it was a vision. I'm going to end this up really soon here. It's getting a little bit long. There's so many quotes. Just go through here and keep reading through it. You can see here I have a file note, right? People who are trying to make the story of Zelph fit into the two Cumorah model. I ask you, do not see how you're doing the same thing the Heartlanders do when they make mental gymnastics to explain away Joseph's quotes on the Mesoamerican setting, right? They both do the same thing to each other. Like I said, they both hold on Joseph Smith's quotes to their model and then dismiss the ones to the other model. And there's all sorts of arguments that I've heard where they try and talk about how Zelph was actually post, radiocarbons dates. You can go through all my notes here. The Naples-Russell Mound in Pike County, how radiocarbons dates to more Mississippian age. There's all sorts of arguments they use. They're all bad. I'm not going to go over them here, but you can read my article and you'll see. And maybe you can leave some notes in the comments if you want to try and hit some of these mental gymnastics that they use to try and explain them away. But it all has to do with some pretty robust cherry picking. Everyone has to do a little bit of that. But why not just entertain a model that gets as close to accepting all the quotes of Joseph Smith and his entire continental model as possible? Seriously, why not? Anyway, I quote Zelph Revisited, an article done by some BOU scholars. They go through every single quote having to do with Zelph. They talk about all the commonalities of whether he actually said it was a vision. I mean, there's lots of witnesses, lots of 6 different diaries where they go through in detail whose elf was, how he spoke of him. 2 of them at least specifically say it was a vision. So once again, I go through the theories of Orson Pratt just as an afterthought. And lastly, I quote, or I paste kind of a little thing here that John Sorensen put together, talking about all the different models, and all the different things that are included in all the different models. You can read through that, check it out if you want. Kind of the final point, though, I'm just going to summarize once again the point I'm trying to make in my article, is that really Joseph Smith supported a continental model, right? I mean, this illustration shows it all. So if unless you're going to do some kind of thing that just kind of totally discounts any of the quotes, and no one can hold to the exact cities that are pointed out because everyone has exact cities. But when it comes to quotes that are actually attributed to Joseph Smith, it's hard to get away from the South American landing. Like, why not just believe him? Like, maybe he said that, maybe he didn't, but why not? Why not believe him? Seems rational to me. Like, I wouldn't care if he landed somewhere else, but why not just believe him? He has Mesoamerica be where the land of Nephi and Zarahemla are. Why not just believe him? Why try and bend over backwards to dismiss it when it works so well with things like the Nimenha archives and all these things that Chief Mitigaw and these Native Americans who are coming up with their new records are talking about, these continental empires. Why not just believe them? The idea that Bountiful was in Central America, the idea that desolation stretched from the Four Corners to the Great Plains, the idea that the Jaredites and the Nephites spread all over through the eastern United States, and that really was where the Nephites lost their power. It is where the Nephites, in New York is where the final battle was. Why not just believe them? And I get it. If you're committed to a different model that's just a Heartland model or just a Meso model, you're going to believe what you're going to believe, and I'm never going to convince you. But if you have an open enough mind to watch all my videos and see the overwhelming evidence for a continental model and how much better it works with the scriptures, with the histories of the Spanish fathers like Ixtlilxochitl and all of their mythology and their histories of Native Americans, where it matches so much better with the geography, which it matches so much better with the archaeology. In my other videos, I have so much amazing evidence, both in Mesoamerica and the Heartland. Why not just believe them? It's kind of my plea. But yeah, I appreciate if you like and subscribe to the channel. If you want more content like this, share this. If you have a friend or someone and you'd like to kind of show them what Joseph Smith's thoughts were, show them this video. They can go to the article. It's in Gathered in One. The article is called Joseph Smith Quotes on the Book of Mormon Geography. You can just Google that. You can walk through them and open up every single quote. I think it's probably the best compilation of quotes on the internet, honestly, especially because it has such good linkage to the first-hand sources. Yeah, just share it to people. Go through and check it out yourself. See if it rings true to you. And I hope that you'll check out some of my other videos and really walk through this idea of a continental model with me, because it really is. It is a cool model. But thanks again, and I hope you have a great night. Bye.